Dr. A.R. Bernard. You recently recovered from the coronavirus. You look well. We've been praying for you, and just tell us a little bit about that. You understand better than anyone what this is about.
Yeah, and I want him to give us some insights, because most people, thankfully, haven't gotten the virus. What was that like for you? What were your first symptoms?
I will tell you, first let me greet my colleagues in ministry and say that I'm so glad to see you gentlemen alive and well and staying safe. I would not wish this on anyone. I experienced full-blown COVID-19 with all of the symptoms that I did not necessarily know were associated with COVID-19. In the month of January and February, I was interacting with elected officials, with community leaders, with the governor, with the mayor, my own congregation and leadership, and some of them ended up getting COVID-19, some end up dying from COVID-19. So to trace it back to see where I got it, I can't. It's not something that's possible for me to do. Could have been anywhere from anyone that I was interacting with. But the last week in March, I began to experience high fever, a dry hacking cough, chills. I began to experience tremoring in my body, and I didn't know whether it was allergies because, I've had a 30-year controlled relationship with asthma, and this season, causes allergies to kick up. So I didn't know, I didn't understand. But on March 28th, which was a Saturday morning, I spent Friday night in a very dark place and experiencing things in my physical body and my mind that I'd never experienced before. So I had called my son and I said, I got to go to the hospital. And I didn't want to go to the hospital because, you can go there and get sick, unfortunately. But he came, my son Jamal came, he picked me up and took me to the hospital. I tell you, when I got there, and I realized I got to keep this within 2 minutes, I was told, but when I got to the hospital, it was a ghost town. There was just a series of tents outside of the emergency room door, and my son had to drop me off and could not come in with me. So I had to go in by myself with one security person who brought me into the ER. Got into the ER, they put me into a cubicle with curtains, so you begin to feel the sense of isolation. You're already experiencing anxiety. My blood oxygen levels were very low, and I'm coming in with pre-existing conditions into that environment. So I'm sitting there, they begin a series of tests, EKG, electrocardiogram, chest x-rays, blood tests, etc. And while I'm sitting there, because I'm in that emergency room for 8 hours, I'm watching them bring people in, sitting up, into other rooms next to me that are divided by curtains only. And within an hour, or even sometimes a half an hour, seeing those same people being rolled out, but they're not sitting up. They're laying down, and the sheet is covering their faces. So I was surrounded by death. I was surrounded by people who were busy and yet who were totally covered in protective gear. So the anxiety, the isolation, all of that comes into play. They decided that they had to keep me because of my blood oxygen levels being so low. So 8 hours later, they got me into a room, not a room with a view, but a room that was partitioned and where I had curtains around me. And the fever continued to become more intense, the chills, all of the symptoms. And then all of a sudden, I lost my sense of taste, my sense of smell. The tip of my tongue became numb. And by the end of the day, I started having these sort of hallucinations. And, that virus, which is so insidious, affects respiratory, affects your heart, affects your brain, and has other effects upon the body that they're yet discovering. Well, by the next morning, I was in full-blown symptom of COVID-19. And I will tell you, the theme that stayed with me the most is the sense of isolation, anxiety, and darkness, because the room is closed, doctors are covered in gear, they're running around, and you don't have that interaction with people. you feel that isolation, you feel that anxiety. And as this thing began to affect me in terms of my brain, you begin to have nightmares. At least that's what happened with me and others that I spoke to who had it to the level of severity that I did. So you're afraid to go to sleep, and I use fear in the sense that, you're apprehensive, you're reluctant to go to sleep because you don't know what you're going to dream. And then you got to a point where I was watching myself walk around the room while I was still in bed. So I'm trying to figure out all of this in my mind. And I will tell you, got to a point where darkness became the theme. And I felt like I was, staring into the abyss. And it was at that time that I abandoned myself to God's providence and then began to reach into the reserve of Scripture in my heart. And John chapter 1, where it says that the light shined in the darkness. And boy, in my mind, in my heart, I began to unpack that text. And that conflict that text represented about the battle between darkness and light came alive in totally new ways and became an anchor for my soul. The doctors began to treat me with hydroxychloroquine, with the antibiotic azithromycin, began to treat me with shots of anticoagulants to prevent against blood clots. And within 36 hours, there was a radical change in what I experienced. I was in the hospital for 5 days. On the 5th day, they sent me home. That is it in a quick nutshell. But I will tell you, it was something that I would never wish on anyone. And what was indelibly left upon me is this whole idea of darkness. And of course, you could hear my testimony online, but looking into the abyss of darkness, and this thing is an insidious thing, this virus, and to think about what Jesus faced on a cosmic level, that broke me down, but gave me a deeper appreciation for what Jesus did in representing me on my behalf and cosmically against the forces of darkness and evil.